Hello and welcome to the Power by Rock podcast, where I'm going to be speaking with one of the most important people in the rock music scene in Southern California right now, Rob Castellon of Wiretap Records. Hopefully I've pronounced that correct. Is that proper?
That's correct. Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's good enough.
How do you say it?
It's pronounced Castellon, but Castellon.
Okay.
Yeah, it's closer.
All right. Well, I won't mispronounce it anymore. Castellon.
There you go.
Is that right?
That's perfect.
Rob founded Wiretap Records about 8 years ago and has built it into a solid independent label that routinely pumps out great release after great release with some of the best bands in punk and rock music out there today, including bands that have been on the show like Mercy Music, the Dreaded Laramie, Breaklights, Decent Criminal, and SHIIVA, as well as some other great bands like Bristol To Memory, Odd Robot, Upper Downer, Wicked Bears, Moldy Roses, Reminders, American Thrills, which just dropped their new album. That's just to name a few of the bands that you might have come to know over the last 8 years. I finally got to meet Rob in person last month during the annual Attention Fest that he puts on to showcase some of the awesome bands from the label. And hearing his story of undying passion for helping the rock music scene, all while having to run the label and manage a life and full-time job, is nothing short of heroic. Well, he also has an offshoot of Wiretap called My Grito, which we'll talk about as well. Hold on to your butts and get ready for the true story of running an independent record label right after this.
You're listening to the Powered by Rock podcast with your host, Isaac Kuhlman. The Powered by Rock podcast was created to help showcase some of the best rock musicians in the world and to pass on to future generations the rock music that has inspired rock fans around the world for decades. We want listeners to be able to hear great stories and life experiences directly from their favorite artists, as well as dig deeper into music theory and talk rock like no other show you've ever heard. This isn't about looking cool, it's about getting real and having a great time. Without further ado, let's start the show.
All right. Hey, welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Power by Rock podcast. I'm incredibly honored today to have the padrino of independent rock labels right now of Wiretap Records, the CEO, Rob Castellon from Wiretap Records, like I said, and from My Grito to talk about the wild ride that comes with creating, running, and building an internationally known independent record label from scratch. Hey, Rob, thanks for taking the time to chat and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Isaac. I'm happy to be here, man. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. Hopefully the intro does a little bit of justice, because I feel like you don't get enough credit out there.
Oh, come on, man. That's very flattering. Thank you.
So let's back up a bit. So basically, you didn't have to start a record label. Let's talk about why you actually started Wiretap back in, I think it was 2014, what you were doing at the time, and why did you decide to create a record label at all?
Yeah, I think I told this story a few times, and it's not that I never wanted to start a record label. It was more that like I think with a lot of things you kind of stumble into it, right? And so in 2014, I'll give you kind of my background. I've at the time I was working at radio. It's funny because you just had Brad from Signal Chords on the last episode, right, or a few episodes ago, and Brad also worked in radio as well. So I worked in sales and marketing for LA station here in LA called K-Rock. So by all means, obviously enjoying my job and doing a job that actually where I was working in music, obviously by all accounts, enjoying my job, having a good time. But it's, but for some reason I just didn't feel in touch with music, independent music and whatnot. So, just at the time I was like not creatively fulfilled, if that makes sense, I'd stopped going to like smaller shows. I was going to radio shows, obviously because of my job and things like that. So I was going to shows like Cage the Elephant or Alabama Shakes, which by all accounts are great bands, but I wasn't going to local shows. I'd stopped going to small shows, or I'd even stopped going to the Glass House and, shows like that, would have, bigger bands or bigger punk bands and whatnot. So I kind of decided myself that I told my wife, I'm like, and maybe it was my age too. I think I started Wiretap when I was, 42. I'm sorry, not 32. So about 10 years ago.
I was gonna say, you're looking pretty good for a 50-year-old.
Thank you, brother. Yeah. So who knows? Maybe it was a midlife crisis or something like that, But I told my wife, and I was like, I think I want to put out like a 45 or 7-inch, like one release. And she's like, you want to start a label? I'm like, no, I don't want to start a label. I just want to do one. I'll be one and done, And of course, it wasn't just one and done. Here we are, 8 years later, and over 120 releases now or something like that. But the first one, like after talking to my wife, I'm like, because obviously there's a, like I think like you mentioned, I'm a full-time dad, full-time husband. Of course, I have a day job, so wiretap is something that I do on the side, of course. But talked it over with my wife and said, all right, let's do it. Let's put out a 7-inch. Like, what are you going to put out? So I reached out to some local bands, a local band here out of Norwalk called Watch for Horses. They're no longer together anymore, but they're like a kind of like a Strokes-ish kind of indie rock type vibe.
Sure.
And at the time they were getting some local play on the local show here on K-Rock. Paired them up with a band by the name of Indian School, which you might know. They're actually the side project of Audio Karate, who ironically I ended up working with later on, through the label. So put out that first 7-inch. I think initially when you start any kind of a project, the first people to support you are your friends and family. Your friends, like they want to support you. They'll pick up a 7-inch. And a lot of people that bought the 7-inch probably didn't even own record players at the time. They just wanted to kind of.
I still don't have a record player. Look at this wall.
Look at that wall, man. Right? Yeah, it's about time maybe you get one then, right?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so the record did fairly well. It sold more than I imagined it would. I thought I was going to be sitting on hundreds of records, which I did for a while, of course. But you learn from the first one, you apply that to the second one, and you kind of keep going from there. So, not that I never intended to start a record label, but I think in the back of my mind I wanted to, but kind of thought like, let's just see how this goes, right? And here we are, 8 years later.
Yeah. So, like, as far as when you started, did it take like an investment? I mean, you didn't create like a recording studio or anything. You kind of reached out to bands who were recording their own stuff, either in a studio or, basically home recording or whatever, however they could make it happen. But then you would take the masters and get it distributed, right? So what kind of infrastructure did you even need to start? Did you just need capital to basically get the records pressed and then market it out to your friends?
Yeah, to start, yeah, that's usually how it goes. Like I said, I think obviously every story is different. But even if you're somebody that's looking to start a record label today, it is very hard to kind of roll that dice and be like, I'm going to pay for everything, man. I'm going to cough up the money to pay for, 300 records, which is obviously with vinyl prices nowadays for manufacturing has gone up over the past few years, of course. And if you're going to use that model, it's going to be very difficult for you to recoup your investment and obviously apply other things that are needed nowadays for marketing and PR and whatnot. So it's like that model, I think that major labels use. And of course, obviously the major labels and even major indies have had to kind of adapt to their model. Someone who started at the time, I made some of those mistakes by, maybe paying for stuff that I maybe shouldn't have, and whatnot. But I mean, at the time, like I said, I really was just kind of, gathering a few funds for the pressing, later on down the line, you realize that you do need some of those assets like PR, of course, and marketing, and of course nowadays paid social. But I mean, at the time, it really is just kind of like a, at the time, like I said, I thought I was just going to do one. So I'm like, let's go big. I did 3 variants, 3 colors of that 7-inch that looking back now, probably when it wasn't probably the best decision now to do, 500 records of a 7-inch of two bands that are relatively unknown. Right. But you kind of live, but at the time, like I said, that was my one and done, and I was gonna go big on it, right?
Yeah, and I actually do e-commerce as well. I sell physical products on Amazon and online, and coach that for about 6-7 years. And first thing that most people want to do is expand their product line, right? So they go out there and just like launch 6 different colors of something. They get like 5 different things, and like, do you even know if there's demand for this yet? Right. Why are you doing 6 colors? Like, why don't you test it with one thing first and see how that goes? And I think that would have probably been good advice for you back in 2014 as well.
Yeah, where were you, Isaac, back then? Come on.
So one thing I can say is that while you have a lot of respect in the rock community, and especially in Southern California, that always doesn't translate to income back into your pocket, right? So like, let's talk about kind of some of the financial risk of putting yourself out there and investing towards distribution of vinyls and such, because I know it's not easy. And when we spoke, you had mentioned that there have been times that you've actually had to ask yourself, what the hell are you even doing? Just kind of give me the examples of some of the ups and downs, and you don't have to name bands or anything like that, but just kind of give me some of the examples from your perspective about what's happened on the goods and the bad so far in your journey.
Yeah, sure, man. Yeah, I think you nailed the, how do you say the head on the nail, right? Or the hammer on
Yeah.
the nail. Yeah, but it's not easy, like it's after 8 years, you kind of look back and yeah, there's times where you evaluate if you're even why you're doing it, right? I think
Yeah.
I think overall you know why you're doing it, because obviously it's you want to do it for the right reasons because you're enjoying it, right? I always told myself that once I wasn't having fun anymore, that I wouldn't do it anymore, and it takes, there's good days and bad days where you're like, you put a pre-order up for pre-order and there's like 5 pre-orders and you're like, yep, this one's not gonna really sell, or it's not moving out the shelves, right? And then there's great days where you put up a pre-order and you're like, all right, cool, I've gathered enough funds now to put towards the next one, or got a little bit of a nest, but there's, again, like in terms of like the investment side of things, I've been fortunate that I'm lucky enough, and thank you to people like you, Isaac, that have signed up for Record Club, that I do every year.
Paid member, by the way, just in case anybody's wondering.
Yeah, thank you, Isaac. Yeah, paid member. Yes, I absolutely appreciate that, buddy. So, it's things like that have allowed me to, if you think about it, something like that, it really is my Patreon. You know what I mean? Like, I've always kind of debated and thought about, hey, why don't I do a Patreon? But it really, Record Club really is my Patreon. That allows me to put funds toward pressing records, and actually still actually doing that in this day and age where a pressing could be anywhere up to $2,500 to $3,000. That's no secret that you can email a plant nowadays and get a quote, and you'll be like, damn, that's a lot of money for putting towards records, right? But yeah, in terms of just the idea of starting a label nowadays, that's just pressing. You factor in things like paying for marketing, paying for the PR, because at the end of the day, if you're just putting out a record and no one's really hearing about it, like it's still more that goes into like actually just putting your record on your website and trying to sell it. And even if a label is interested in whatnot, like what else have you been doing? Like how's your digital? How's your social? So there's a lot of things that obviously go into that I've learned over the past few years, and it's taken 8 years for me to get to where I think that I'm super proud of where the label's at nowadays. But yeah, it's obviously hasn't been something I've done overnight, right?
Yeah, and that's a great point, because I think a lot of people, starting a record label is kind of like starting a band, right? You have to be persistent. You can't not promote yourself because you have to put yourself out there. You have to be visible. And the difference between running a record label and being a band, just like any company, like, I run essentially a media company. People don't really like to support brands or companies unless they like the things that are associated with it, right? So like you have to be, kind of networking and associating yourself with the right people and doing that. And that's one thing I think that's your superpower, is finding really good bands to put on your label, because I don't know of any label, and I'll talk about some of the other ones in a little bit, but I don't know of any label right now that's putting out consistently as good of releases as you are on Wiretap. And I'll put Fat Records and all the other ones up there, even, big ones like Atlantic. You don't see, consistently 5 to 6 really good releases, or even up to 10 releases a year that are as good as yours.
Dude, thank you so much, Isaac, man. Yeah, that means a lot, man. Because at the end of the day, all I want to do is put out good records. I think a lot of us are still album guys, and I still, listen to records. Obviously we put out singles, and that's the model that has been working for some bands and artists nowadays. But I still listen to records every day, and that's my goal, is to, if I dig the record and I put it on and it just hits me, like even after the first listen or second listen, like I kind of go with my gut, man. Luckily my gut's been working apparently. So
yeah, well, if you ever want to quit this and go work for a big company as an A&R guy, I think you'd do pretty well.
Yeah, thanks, man.
So I think most people just don't realize that when they say, independent record label, there's usually only like 1 or 2 people really involved. It's, a single person, or, 2 business partners or whatever, which means that's working to find artists, signing them, producing their releases on some, on some sides, maybe even advancing them some money for recording at times. Not necessarily saying that's your model, but some companies do. Help market those releases, create events to showcase their roster like you did with Attention Fest, process orders and manually fulfill those orders, and so on. And usually these labels owners also have a full-time job. So I know like many indie labels like Andy Pohl from Sell the Heart Records, Mike Park from Asian Man Records, Noah and his partner from Otitis Media Records in Texas. They put a lot of work in just like you. And, sometimes it's overwhelming. Like, what do you see that keeps you going, and how do you see it getting better? I mean, obviously you're not in a bad position, but if you could like wave a magic wand, what would you do and be like, this is what I want. This is how I want to run this company.
Yeah, no. I'm happy to say that I subscribe to the Mike Park school of running a record label. Obviously Mike from Asian Man is an influence on not only on all of us that run a record label. Mike has the respect from all the majors, like Epitaph and Fat and all these labels that have a huge team, of course. And Asian Man is still himself, doing exactly kind of what we all do. What I do is packing orders in my living room, where I'm sitting today. Right now is where I pack orders. So yeah, I think it takes all that. It really is, not because I don't want it, but I mean, it's also like, I can't afford to, pay anybody to do that kind of stuff. And I've been asked, and I've even been offered, and every now and then people will kind of come down and help me and pack orders and whatnot, or even help out whatever they can. Which way I'm obviously flattered that people would want to take time out of their day to help out and be involved. But at the end of the day, I do have to sometimes manage my family life, and I got kids upstairs doing homework and whatnot. It's like, I can't have people in here and packing orders with me. It's like, it just doesn't, it doesn't sometimes make sense for people's schedules and whatnot. So
and getting office space is just a terrible idea usually.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the biggest waste of money you can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, but in terms of like, if I could snap my fingers and it sounds cliche, but this is still a business. And with any business, like, it really is about capital sometimes. It's like, not only, and not just because I want to press more records and whatnot. I think the luxury of that major labels and even like major indies have is being able to put some of those funds into paid marketing and, paid social and PR and whatnot. And, giving the artists kind of what I think they are missing, because like sometimes that's the difference between getting a record or even a band to kind of break, is getting more people to find out about it, and that's the challenging part with something with a label that the size of the label that Wiretap is that unfortunately I do the best I can with every release that I do, of course, but I mean, for the most part, there's no marketing department that's putting, a whole, budget and whatnot into every release, because we just don't have the luxury of having that. We do what we can, of course, and I meet with every band and every artist to kind of put together a plan, and put together a social calendar, and of course, and a marketing calendar, and kind of do what our plan's going to be. But I mean, that's the luxury that a major label has, is having funds. So I don't want to say that it's only about funds, but I mean, perfect world, if there was a label like Fat or or Epitaph that wanted to take on a smaller indie, that's something that could help out in those areas. I'd definitely be something that I'd be open to. Of course, I still wanted to be involved with Wiretap, of course, but I mean, who knows? I think that's the challenge part with a small indie label like mine. But
it's either get a nice investor who's really happy with what you're doing, inject some cash, or kind of, they call it buying in instead of selling out, where a company buys into what you're doing and helps you with, basically synergy, right? So they can help with some of the marketing, they can help with some of the financial, but they don't have to put a lot of money into purchasing the company or something like that. So
exactly.
There's definitely some great things out there that could be done. And, that's exactly, I think everybody who's in a small business and knows that what they're doing is going the right way, that's kind of like what they want, is just like, get some help to get to the next level, and just get kind of mulling that over and doing that over and over and again. And I always say, like, perfect world, Powered by Rock gets a couple $1 million, and then all of a sudden we can actually do what we want to do with a lot of other stuff, like live venues and some of this other stuff, helping partnering with people like Wiretap and at least a lot of other record labels to kind of showcase more artists and do more stuff. And it when you say it's not always about capital, for businesses it is. For the people involved, it's not, right? So like, you don't have to necessarily make $1 million a year, but to be able to live off of your business, that would be great. And if you can also grow it, that's even better. So I think the two things there would be nice, and capital definitely helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about some of the relationships you have, because you actually have a lot of great relationships with a lot of bands and promoters and influencers in the rock music scene. Do you have any advice to people who, maybe they're bands, or maybe there are other independent record labels or whatever? Do you have any advice as to how people build these relationships and how to find good people to work with?
Yeah, man, there really is no clear way to say that, but you just have to, you gotta connect. It's like you have to. I think early on when I started, like I was constantly on social, or even just sending emails out. You just have to put your face out there and get people to know who you are. It's plain and simple. That's kind of really how it is. I was fortunate that early on, like, well, I'll back up. I did, actually, it's like, since it really is just me that runs the label, the only other person that actually is really essentially kind of part of the label, if you will, and I include him as part of the label. It's Mike Kubios, who runs Earshot Media. He does PR for the label full time. So in a sense, even though he isn't on quote unquote payroll and all that whatnot, he is a big part of how I think the label has grown over the years, because he makes the label shine. He's gotten us press. He's got, obviously, he hustles his butt off to coordinate video premieres and interview opportunities for obviously things like what we're doing today, right, for the artists. So but in terms of like how somebody can kind of get when you first start out with your label, you don't really have the funds to put towards things like that. So it's going to take you to emailing websites and getting content and getting interviews and whatnot. So it's like the more your name is out there and people actually because these websites and these contacts get emailed every day from various people. I'm sure from firsthand how that goes. So
I get about 30 emails from Mike every week, if not more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So as you know, like I said, the more that people get your, know what you're doing, and they see your name more, and they see that you're, as much as we think that everybody has good intentions, in this industry, like some people don't really vibe with the, there's some people that just don't really vibe, right? So the more that people see that you have the best intentions and you're actually doing this for the quote unquote right reasons, they'll help you out. I think everybody has the good, their best foot forward and are trying to help out, whether it be a band or your label, and and really, like I'm okay with people even emailing me and asking me for help, or even I did that, when I first started out, I emailed a few people and said, hey, I'm starting a label, like, what do you suggest, any vendors or any websites or whatever? And, like I've done that in the past, and I've liked to quote unquote pay it forward. So, really put yourself out there and just, help people out, or ask people to help you out. And you'll be surprised at how many people are actually willing to help out. Yeah.
And there's like three things in there that I want to pick up, because one thing I think most people don't want to do is promote themselves, especially artists, right? Mm-hmm. So they think, I made good music, people will want to listen to it. Now, like, you have to be presently involved in their ability or visibility spectrum for them to even catch you, right? So it's like, a shooting star, right? Like shooting stars happen often, but we don't pay attention unless we're looking up at that particular moment in the sky, right? Mm-hmm. So like you said, you have to be kind of present, always trying to find ways to get in front of people, just doing little podcasts and just doing whatever, like talking to people, going to shows, hanging out, making sure that people know that you're there. Even if you're an artist, a label, whatever, that's the easiest way to grow your presence, right? So then also build relationships. Steve Caballero was on this show about a year ago, mm-hmm. and Steve Caballero is in the band Urethane now. He mentioned that, obviously from, I think 1978 or something like that is when he started the Faction. He was a 14-year-old, in Southern California. And he said, after all these years, the thing that helps him get, and the band Urethane get more and more credibility is the fact that he's always been good to people. And if mm-hmm. he's like, if I would have burned those bridges along the way, I wouldn't have a band right now. There would be nobody in this band that would want to be in this band. And basically nobody would want to listen to us or put us on for, labels or anything like that. So yeah, make sure that you're going and connecting, but also being good to people, because even if you are the greatest artist that nobody's ever heard of, nobody cares unless you're a humble person. You talk about, others with respect, support other people. You can't just be like, Liam Gallagher out there and expect to become a rock star anymore, right? So it's really not like that. I mean, the rock music in general is not as prevalent as it used to be. So you have to be building it from that DIY kind of ground up level at this point for most rock bands. And I think, over the long term, I think point 3 there would be, essentially you can then turn that into paying it forward, right? So helping people, there's like a chain of helping, right? So like even Warren Buffett helped Bill Gates, who helps these other people, who helps, Mark Zuckerberg, who helps all these other people, right? It's like this chain of mentoring. And you're not going to just go to your grave with all the information you have and never share a bit of it, right? Like, so you might as well start helping other people, because in the long run, they'll also support you. The people that helped you will also then kind of turn into this like circle of life that you guys can all support each other. And I think if you know anything about DIY scenes, I mean, that's legitimately how the entire ecosystem works. So I'm glad that you in like one answer, you've kind of spun all 3 of those concepts. And I hope people who are watching this really pay attention to that segment, because without those kinds of words from you, I don't think most people are going to be successful doing anything in life, let alone anything related to music. So be good, get yourself out there, and then pay it forward. So support everybody that helps you. So
yeah, absolutely, man. Like I think, and it sounds harsh, but I mean, the phrase "don't be a dick." It really does hold hold a lot of value. It's like, just be cool and be upfront with people, and that's always been something I've always been trying to do. Is I'm hopefully you talk to any band that I've worked with, and I'm hoping that they've all had positive things to say about, even if the release didn't quite go the way they intended it for it to go, but I'm hoping that they all have good things to say about our arrangement and our time together. And that's always about something that's always been important to me, is to never burn bridges, as you said. And the same goes for if you're in a band, like, don't be a dick, and that goes a long way, right?
Yeah. And I should have put up more of the albums of yours behind me before this. I didn't think to do it, but I have a bunch that are still waiting to be hung in my closet from your record labels. So they're still sitting there, but I'll get them up eventually.
Oh, thanks, man.
One thing I want to bring up that I remembered from our conversation is that you basically didn't start out to be like a punk label, even though a lot of people consider Wiretap to be kind of like one of the more prevalent punk labels out there. But that's not what you set out to do. And I'll say not everyone on the label is punk band, right? So like Bristol To Memory is an example of a band that like I wouldn't consider punk. Mercy Music, while Brendan looks punk, I wouldn't classify their music as punk. I would call it kind of more like pop rock or just rock music. But both of those bands are amazing. Like, what are you looking for in a band when you're thinking about signing them? Is it just sound? Is it image? Is it them actually going out and playing? Kind of let me know kind of what you're thinking when you're looking at a band.
Yeah, you're exactly right, man. Like when I first started Wiretap, like I never really wanted it to be, I don't think a label really picks their audience sometimes, like who's gonna, obviously you can put out records by a certain type of genre and whatnot, but I never wanted Wiretap to be, again, no offense to any label, because like Epitaph or Fat Records, who of course have created obviously a legacy for what they've done with skate punk and punk rock in general, right? But I never wanted to be Fat Records. I never wanted to be Epitaph or whatnot. But I think the label that influenced me probably the most, and I think I've said it, and actually I actually put out a compilation this actual year as a tribute to Vagrant Records. So I always saw Wiretap as a bit of an not an extension, but like an homage, to the way that Vagrant was. Vagrant was obviously, championed the whole emo thing, of course, but they also had bands like Face to Face that, were completely different from Dashboard Confessional and a band like Kofax or The Anniversary, right? It's like they were very diverse in that sense, where they could have all those bands on the Vagrant America tour and it still made sense, So that's kind of, not that I use that mentality for everything that I put out. I think early on, that was kind of my direction. I said, I want to be the modern day Vagrant kind of thing.
Well, didn't you know somebody, or don't you work with somebody who was like the head of Vagrant, right?
Yeah, I actually interned at Vagrant in the early days, in the quote unquote heyday. I think it was 2001 era. So I obviously, influenced heavily by that roster and that sound, and what came out of those few years at the quote unquote heyday of Vagrant. So, I still kept in touch with some of the people there, and I think, in fact, actually later on, through just like I said, through kind of networking with people in the scene, and I became friends with Tom over at Washed Up Emo, who runs a awesome website called Washed Up Emo. And Tom actually put me or made a comment to Josh Berwanger from the anniversary about kind of, hey, you should check out Wiretap, and Josh reached out to me a few weeks later, and ended up actually putting out his solo record a few years ago, I believe in 2017, I want to say.
Nice.
And from then, I ended up actually working with Josh and his other project, Radar State, which is Matt Pryor and Jim Suptic from the Get Up Kids. So it kind of all came full circle, me interning there and kind of being influenced by that roster, of course. And, I never would have imagined that I would have put out a record from, Get Up Kids are one of my favorite bands of all time. So it's like, kind of, it was kind of one of those like pinch me moments of like, hey, like what? I'm putting out a record from one of my favorite bands, and one of my favorite labels. So great. So one of those funny things.
It's weird when things like that come around, because I remember, I'll give an example. I did this podcast for the last year and a half or so, and I did an interview with Radical Adam Lorbach, who was in Homegrown from back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I was like, I remember listening to you while driving to like the lake in summer in high school. And now I'm sitting here like interviewing you. If I'd have told myself in high school that I'd be interviewing Adam from my Homegrown, I'd be like shitting myself. I'd be like, that's awesome. Like, how does that happen? But I mean, it's one of those things, like if you're passionate, you're going to find ways to work yourself into the mix of, the bands, the labels, whoever you want. I mean, everybody asks me like, how do you book guests for this show? I'm like, you just ask, like, you just talk to people. You just go out and just see who's available and, what they're putting out. And if you want to talk to them, if you like them, all that kind of stuff. And I think most people are just absolutely, crippled by fear of rejection. So they won't do that kind of stuff. And I think that's where people like yourself, anybody who starts a business, they, at least in theory, really want to do that. They want to reach out, take that leap of faith, and make those kinds of connections. So I think that's pretty awesome. So in that sense, so if you're thinking like, okay, like what kind of bands you like, what kind of, rock music you're kind of thinking about, what's the kind of submission process if bands actually do want to reach out to you? Do you have a contact form, or is it like, hey, you know what, we're just going to kind of look out for bands that we kind of know of that are on our radar? Or how do you actually find bands?
Yeah, no, there's a way for people to reach out, on the website at wiretaprecords.com. Just like you, I get anywhere from, it's grown more. And obviously since the early days, it was very little, because, you're a new label, of course, and you're not getting a lot of submissions. And the few that you're getting aren't quite there yet, but over time they've gotten better, of course. And obviously we found a few gems to put out, some music over the last few years. But yeah, I get anywhere from, 15 to 20 submissions per week nowadays, and a lot of it's good. A lot of it, I just can't really get behind because, obviously don't have the calendar and the bandwidth to put out everything that I enjoy. But I will say that your best foot forward is just like an interview, like, sadly, this is very much like first impression. And, if I've heard of the band, then I've been aware of it, and you're doing something right. If you say, hey, I'm so-and-so from whatever band, we're out of this city, we've done this, whatever, and I've heard of the band, then you're onto something right. You've been out there doing your thing. If you're a brand new band and I've never heard of you, or even much less if you're from a different country, but I will say the bands that I've been able to kind of work out an arrangement and actually move forward with have been the band that said, hey, this is a new record that we just recorded, this past summer. We're shopping around for somebody. We'd like to meet with you, whatever. That had a bit of a plan, right? Instead of like, hey, we put this record out last week. Can we put it out on vinyl? I was like, like, how is that really the best intention? You really expect a label to get behind that when you already released this already and it's 2 months old already? Like, what's the shelf life on that from a marketing standpoint? So like, think about what your email, when you put together that email, is like, what are my expectations, one, and what are my what are my goals from it, right? It's like, if your record came out already, like, you should have sent me that record 6 months ago. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, so it really is sometimes about timing as well. But I mean, you're right, man. It's like, I put a record on, and I still try to listen to everything that gets submitted. And as a music lover, I think, I think you have the same type of listening habits that I do. It's like you put it on, I think you kind of know from the first few, that's a mood that sets, you set a mood with your first track, you scan a few tracks and like, you kind of know, right? And something kind of registers and you're like, all right, I'm going to listen to this a little bit more. So what I'll do is like, I'll open up an email, and if I like it, I'll put it aside or I'll file it away and then come back to it later, but it really is about if I dig it and I like it, I like melody, it's like, I like melodic pop punk and, melodic rock. So it's like, I think that's kind of been the model, is like, for what I put out is like, if it's good, I'll get behind it. Obviously there's a lot more that goes into that, but I mean, I think you're right that a lot of the artists that we work with, I wouldn't pigeonhole or put in the same categories like, hey, they're just a punk band, because, punk adjacent is, I think you kind of, there's that punk adjacent category where like, hey, these guys could play a punk show with another band and, they'd be okay. But, that's kind of how the model I usually use for if I want to get behind it, if I think that's going to fit within the roster.
Yeah, and I think just to help clarify, if anybody's looking to submit like thrash metal or death metal, I don't think that's really what's in your wheelhouse, right? Yeah,
yes and no. You know what I mean? Like thrash metal, maybe no, but we work with hardcore bands. It's like we've worked with like SHIIVA. By all accounts is a hardcore band, which they're a little bit more melodic, a little bit not as we call it thrash metal, of course. But I mean, we've worked with the Casket Lottery, which again is more of a hardcore band, but thrash metal maybe not up my alley, right?
Yeah. And then speaking of SHIIVA, I mean, those guys are great. I think if you're a fan of Turnstile, maybe some of the bands in that scene, like you'll love SHIIVA. Jabril is awesome. That whole band is awesome. I've got a chance to meet them. They were on this show, and their sound is just awesome. Like Jabril was saying, like he was more kind of influenced by Motown than like punk music, and I was like, that's awesome. Like you're in a hardcore band and you're influenced by Smokey Robinson or something like that. Which is just you don't hear people say that kind of stuff. And then obviously you go watch Turnstile and they kind of have that kind of background too, some hip hop, some Motown, some of that flavor infused in some of their music as well. So it's a different hardcore scene these days than I think maybe the 90s and 80s had, but I think it's doing its justice to that genre by still making it, a punk hardcore show, which is a lot of fun to see. Yeah. So let's talk about some just bands out there. Like, do you think that there are any bands out there that are not on your label that you think are great bands and you either would love to have them work with you, or you're just a fan and you want to see them kind of explode in general?
Oh man, there's so many bands, like I said, over the years, of course, there's, I think what I'll do is I won't really single out bands that I would love to work with. I think the bands that are friends or whatever, I think that have put out records with on other labels or friends labels that I'll put out, like, I think just need more recognition. Let's see who's great. There's a band out of Boston called Rebuilder. I don't know if you've heard of the band. Yeah, I think, those guys are just, I think if you see those guys in their hometown in Boston, I think they're great. They're like pop punkish, but they got some keys in some of their songs, just look them up. Rebuilder out of Boston.
Actually, I might know them. I have to double check to see if it's the same band that I'm thinking of, but I might know of who you're actually speaking about. That's cool. I mean, the one thing I think that you keep mentioning is that, there's just not enough time in the day, not enough money in the bank to basically put out all the music that's good out there. And I will say, when I first started Powered by Rock and started digging into like, let's find out who's good bands and listen to good music again. I did not realize that there were like thousands of really good bands still making music. Like not only just like the old guys that are still putting it out from like, the 2000s and late 90s, but there are so many bands since like, even like 2010 that I kind of like didn't even see come up and rise. Like Turnstile is an example of a band I did not know about really until they released Glow On. I knew about their last album before that, but I didn't really listen to it. Like I thought it was good, but just didn't spend much time on it. And then Glow On comes out and they're like the biggest rock band in the world. Like that, that's not on mainstream radio right now. And it's just, these bands kind of crop up and you're like, how do they have 40,000 followers? That's like more than some of the big bands that I know out there. It's like Jimmy Eat World only has 60,000 or whatever. You're like,
I know,
this band I've never heard of is just as popular as them. And I'm like, okay, but there's like thousands of bands that are really good. So it's a good thing to see that. It's nice to be able to plug in, But for anybody who's like a fan of music, they really have to actually go out and search for it, which is the hard part, right? Because a lot of guitar-based music is done by independent labels. It's done by people who don't have the budget of, you know, the hip hop and, you know, these producers and record labels that are putting out pop and hip hop and country records. So I will say that for anybody who's listening to this, if you want to know good music, there's lots of it out there, especially if you're if you're a rock fan. If you want to start somewhere, start with Wiretap first, because Rob knows what the hell he's doing. And, you know, obviously check out Rebuilder, because that's, if Rob's saying they're good, I guarantee you they're good. But yeah, so I think that's just an interesting thing, because I don't think most people really realize that rock music is still around and it's still really good, even though, you know, everybody says, oh, all the music that could ever be made has already been made. And it's like, no.
Yeah, I think the people that say that just aren't really people that seek out new music. You know, it's like,
yeah,
you know, obviously it's cliche to say, like, people say, oh, there's no good, you know, music anymore. Like, there is. You know, it's like, you just stop paying attention. You know.
Yeah, and a lot of it's better than you even had, you know, when you were in high school or when you stopped listening to new music, right? So I think that's, a lot of people are just set in their ways. But I'm telling you, if you want to listen to good music and you are passionate about good rock music, you will love the fact that there's tons of it out there. So if you knew now what you knew or what you didn't know, essentially, when you started Wiretap, would you do things differently, or would you tell yourself to do something else during the process of growing this? Like, did you learn from a mistake that you wish you could turn back and go, oh, I wish I didn't do that? Or was there anything else that you would be like, maybe I should do it maybe in a different way? Aside from the color variants.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's see, man. You know, obviously, like, I'm not looking back at reflective on the history of, like, what I didn't do right, you know, or what didn't do wrong. Maybe just like taking more, I don't want to use the word risk, you know, but, like, you know, obviously, like, you know, being somebody that's a family man, of course, you just can't be like, I'm going to quit my job and roll the dice on this, right? Because that's just something that, you know, I would recommend to anybody, you know, saying risk your family's, you know, your retirement, and risk your family's security and, you know, of doing that and for rolling dice on doing your label. But
I mean, if you're in that position, then yes, absolutely work yourself out of it. But if you're not in that position, don't put yourself in that position.
Exactly. Yeah. So this will really apply to your question. But I mean, I think looking back now, I think I would have started Wiretap earlier in my age. I think I would have started probably in my 20s, you know, because that you're open more to taking those type of risks, right? Or jumping in a van and touring with the bands and kind of being a little bit more involved in the day-to-day of your artist, right?
Yeah.
So
you don't have as much responsibility for the things around you, right? The people and everything. So
yeah, absolutely. So, you know, that's probably the only thing I think I would have done earlier, because say if I would have started this, you know, in my 20s, I think it would have been just a tail end of like CDs and all that. And I think, you know, that may have been, you know, actually something that actually may have kind of impacted and actually helped kind of get it, you know, proper distro and things like that, you know, and it was just a different time in terms of, you know, CDs and vinyl and whatnot. So I think it would have been a little bit time to kind of have Wiretap kind of positioned in that scene, you know, during that time with artists and with other, you know, with distros and whatnot. So, you know, that's the only thing I think I can look back and think like, I think I would have started early on in my life, I guess. Right.
Yeah. And I say the same thing. Like, I never wanted to own a business when I was like in my 20s. I was like, there's so much risk in that. But now I'm like, you didn't have anything to risk. Like, you were broke. Like if you had even, you know, it wasn't broke, but like you didn't have any assets really. All you had to do was like work for a job and make money. And then you could have turned that around and made a business. But no, you didn't, like, you dummy. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good piece of advice, especially for people who are ever considering to, like, you know, try to do something, especially if they don't have kids, they don't have like mortgages and stuff like that. If they can make ends meet and still put some cash aside to start a business, that's always a pretty good idea for people who are, you know, obviously driven. Motivation's the biggest thing for most people who start a business, though. Most people think, oh, all you need is money and a good plan. I'm like, yeah, but you need to do the work. That's kind of the whole point.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And with that said, also, like, you know, I don't want to make people think that also, like, if you're older, then it's too late, because that's far from the truth either. Because, like, I also want to see the other side of that, is that, you know, why not? You know, it's I started Wiretap in my 30s, you know, it's like, and, you know, like, if you want to do something, just do it. It's like that's what I've learned. I think people should take away from that is like, hey, if you want to start a label in your 30s or in your 40s or whatnot, like, who gives a shit? It's like, I think we all get kind of caught up too much in like what people are going to think. It's like, who cares if you're starting something in your 30s or 40s or whatever? It's like, if you want to do it and you think you can make an impact or help people out, whatever, whatnot, let's just do it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think that, oh, what are my family and friends going to think that I'm starting a new business when I'm 45? It's like, if they don't support you, then they're not really your friends, are they? Like,
yeah, totally.
So I think two things that kind of really helped open my eyes to your label was the record club offer that you guys put out. And I was like, oh, that's a really good deal. Like, that's a no brainer. And I actually just originally did it on the digital side. And I was like, I don't have a record player, so I'm not going to get the vinyls. And I was like, a month later or less or something, I was like, I'm upgrading. Like, this was stupid. Like, why would I just do the digital? Like the whole point of music is like being able to touch a lot of things, right? Like, read the liner notes, see some of the music, see the albums, even if like I just display them for kind of artwork right now. But when I do get a record player, I will actually play some of these albums. And then the other thing was that compilation, the Vagrant Records compilation that you guys did with, I think it was like 35 or 36 songs on there. Kind of talk me through your decision to put the record club out. Like, how did you come up with that idea? Is that something you kind of pulled from somewhere else? And then also, how did you decide on the compilation? Specifically, I know we talked about you being involved with Vagrant, but why did you decide to do this compilation now?
Yeah, no, record club, like, and it's, obviously I'm not the first to do a record club. There's been a bunch of other labels that have done record clubs, like, like No Sleep Records did a record club for a number of years. I don't know if they still do it now, but there's a lot of labels that do record clubs in general. AF Records does their record club every year as well. So the idea was never, it was, it's not an original idea, of course. But I had people that had asked me, hey, you should do a record club, or I'd support it, or I'd sign up every year, and it never was quite to the point where I thought that I had enough people to really kind of support it, because you can put it out there, but I mean, like, I think the first year I did it was 2016, I want to say. Yeah, 2016. And, I have no problem looking back now and saying that I think I got like 7 people to sign up for the record club.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're committing to those 7 people that you're going to put out X amount of records, right, on vinyl per year. And, you kind of look back, you're like, all right, let's do this, right? Let's figure out a way to get this done. But yeah, the record club is something that like I said, like, I see as my Patreon, and a little inside, it's actually on sale pretty soon for 2023.
I wanted to bring it up so you could plug it a little bit.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, so, again, it's a really, something that's really important, not under the label, but I mean, just in general, because it does allow me to keep doing this thing, and not only gathering funds for the next year, but I'm so grateful, and people like you that not only support with through your abilities, like the podcast and whatnot, and your social and whatnot, but I mean, I see people on here that have been supporting me and doing record club for like 5-6 years, which is incredible. And it's amazing that people that maybe we've met a few times here and there, like that, but the majority of people I've never met in person, and that's a testament to not only they're supporting the label and the quote unquote trust that they have in the label and the content that I'm putting out because of the artists, of course, but that's supporting the bands. It's like that's them seeing value in the music and putting their hard-earned dollars up front and trusting in the label that they're going to enjoy what they like and enjoy what I put out. So I thank everyone for that. So that's awesome.
So before we talk about the compilation, kind of run down what usually entails the record club, because I actually don't even remember everything that's in it. I know you get a certain amount of vinyls. You'll get some merch, like a very cool mouse pad. I've got that on my desk right now. You'll get a shirt, some other stuff, right? Yeah.
There you go, buddy. Yeah. As a member for this year, Isaac, among the rest of the members, got, I believe it was 8 LPs this year as part of that. You got a 7-inch from the Dreaded Laramie, their EP that came out this year. You're getting a long sleeve wiretap shirt that should be arriving probably within a week or 2. So look out for that. Just in time
for Christmas in the cold
weather. Exactly. Yeah, it's getting cold now, so you need a long sleeve. What else? I think you may have gotten a test press, guaranteed test press in the mail. That should be.
I don't even know. I don't think yet, but maybe it's on its way. So yeah.
Yeah. So you got a test press, and then obviously all digital downloads, of course, for the with the subscription.
Yep.
But yeah, it's something that that we try to give people something kind of cool. Obviously, you save on shipping, and kind of bulk shipping, of course, and helps obviously save on cost. So it's a value there for the person obviously signing up. But I mean, yeah, every year we try to make something kind of exclusive for for the members, and we have a few things that are kind of coming up in for next year that we'll announce probably within a week or so.
Yeah, and that's one thing I'll say is, it's maybe it's hard to trust somebody. I can't remember exactly how much it was, but it's like less than $200, I think, from memory. And it might be like, oh, that's a lot of money to shell out for new music. But it's like, honestly, when you see the releases, you listen to the music, I'm like, this was such a bargain. Like, this was such a good deal when you look at everything you get. And the fact that you can support a local business or a small label, an indie label, by doing that. And I had this conversation with OC Sellout Chris, about like promoting shows. It's like putting on a label and stuff, like pre-orders and buying event tickets in advance literally will stop the anxiety and stress of running a label so much more. So like when you can actually pre-purchase some stuff and help out a label, they can actually kind of rest a little bit and say, okay, we got this. We got a few of these releases that are going to come out, and they don't have to worry and financially stress about every single thing, because it's really hard to run these things when you don't know what's going to happen. Right. It's nice to have that kind of that guarantee, the pre-saves, the pre-buys, pre-purchase, whatever. Mm-hmm. So that way you can kind of feel good that like these things are going to happen, and you don't have to like cancel things at the last minute or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So if you're thinking about joining, I'd say do it, because it's awesome. And don't wait till like, whenever you think, oh, well, now I want this. It's like, well, just join it, get in there and do it, because you never know if you're going to miss out on something.
You're preaching the gospel, Isaac. Thank you, man.
Yep.
Yeah. No, it's it definitely alleviates a lot of stress and anxiety, at the start of the year, where you're like, all right, we need 8 or 9 releases, we need to fund them, of course, ahead of time. When people support that means the world. So yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about the compilation, the Vagrant Records compilation. Mm-hmm. What, like, did you come to the bands? I know there's just pretty much all the bands I've listed, plus, another bunch of bands, but how did you get everybody on board? Why did you decide to do it now? What was the reasoning behind putting this compilation out?
Yeah, no, it's been an idea that I've had kind of in my mind for a number of years now. I also I'll make note that I actually co-released that with Friend Club Records on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. Rob, another Rob, who runs Friend Club, and I, we were chatting one day just on social, and I kind of mentioned we were talking about like old labels and Vagrant and stuff like that, and and we kind of just got to talking, and we're like, we should put out a compilation, of Wiretap bands, of course, and Friend Club, his bands, and the idea kind of sat there for a little. I think this is right during the pandemic, and yeah. Obviously we're all had more time on our hands, of course, to collaborate and kind of think of ideas and whatnot. So I think the idea for me was kind of there, but I mean, I think we both kind of inspired each other to kind of actually make it happen. So we both kind of reached out to our roster and said, hey, we're thinking of doing this. I think Rob's label, Friend Club, kind of leaned more into their artists tended to be a lot more younger, as opposed to like maybe my roster was a little bit more rooted in more of the older Vagrant. So
they were like, what the fuck is Vagrant Records, and who the fuck are these bands, or what?
Yeah. So, a lot of the Friend Club Records artists, tended to kind of like gravitate more towards like, Balance of Composure and Thrice and, more of the later Vagrant artists, right?
Sure.
Whereas like my bands tended to be a little bit more into like Rocket from the Crypt and Face to Face and Alkaline Trio type stuff. So it's like I think it made sense for two labels like ours to kind of come together and kind of put together a nice compilation that spanned kind of like not only the early years of Vagrant, but also like the later years, and stuff like like that I mentioned, like that we're towards the later years of that catalog. So no, I think
and I should mention, I guess I did not mention this, but the compilation is bands from Wiretap and Friends Club mm-hmm. covering songs from Vagrant artists. So I should say that they were cover songs, because I don't think I made that clear, but mm-hmm. anybody who hasn't seen it, it's like 30 how many is it? 36, 35 songs, something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head.
I want to say 31, 32, something like that. Yeah, it's around, it's 30 something.
Yeah, and it's cover songs. I mean, I think it was like Odd Robot does like the hippos. Like I can't even remember who does all the songs. I'm like, these are awesome. Like, who even thought to do like, you know, a hippos cover? Like I loved the hippos when I was younger. I was like, I forgot they existed until they put that song. I was like, I got to go listen to some hippos now too. Yeah. So you know, there's a lot of stuff on there I was like, man, I remember getting that compilation of Lookout or Vagrant Records that was like 25 years in the street or whatever like that. I think it was. And I was like, that's an awesome freaking compilation. So in that fashion, are you considering doing a Wiretap non-cover compilation album as well?
That is something that might be coming down the line, you know, and as not only for this coming year, but you know, I'll you know, I will say that, you know, the 10-year anniversary of the label is coming up in 2024. So there's some things that might be kind of that I'm exploring, kind of, you know, putting together. So
gotcha.
You know, whether that be unreleased music or that be sort of a retrospective of, you know, the quote unquote best of the label for the past decade. So yeah, you know, there's a lot of things that, you know, whether that be, you know, unreleased stuff or even like, I still want to do way more cover stuff. I love covers in general. You know, I think that's a good way for artists to kind of like get people's attention, if you will. And sometimes, you know, like, you know, if I see a cool cover, like,
I don't think Limp Bizkit would have been Limp Bizkit without covering Faith, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly, right. Yeah,
put them on the map.
It worked for them, yeah. So, but I love covers, you know, and even if it's like covers of like a full catalog, you know, it's like you mentioned Andy from Sell the Heart. You know, I think Andy partnered with Lava Socks, and they put out a Rancid Outcome the Wolves record a few years ago, but I think 2 years ago. So, you know, that was covers of bands doing every track from that record. So I think things like that are I think for me are always kind of fun and cool. So maybe there'll be a few things that might pop up in the next year or two like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I did tell you this, and I do mean this sincerely, that I have yet to hear a release from Wiretap that I don't like. I mean, your standard for good music is like way higher than most people, right? So like even if when you put out something that's a bit different, you know, it's still really good. So I think that, you know, I just want to know, like, do you have a definition of what you consider to be good music? Like, do you have a wheelhouse, or do you kind of just say, here's kind of a formula, here's what I like? Or is it just you hear it and that's what it is?
Yeah, I want to give you like this like great answer and say like this is the formula when I, you know, but it really is like I play it and I listen to it and I listen to a lot. Like when I'm considering something, like I'll listen to it probably on my morning run and my morning walk in the morning, like through lunchtime. Like I'll play it all day, like, and it's got to like register, right? And then the next step is kind of like, all right, I like it. I think this is a good record, but will it fit with the other artists that are on the roster? Like, will that not only will the band kind of blend well with the other roster of like playing shows together, we're touring together and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
Or will that record just in general kind of fit the vibe? Like, what are people like you as a record club member, or, you know, like other people going to think about like, oh, this is like I said, I'm flattered that you say like, even if it's something that's not traditionally the sound of Wiretap, will you appreciate kind of why I put it out? You know, and at the end of the day, if I think that the answer is yes to that, then I run with it and like, you know what, let's put it out, you know. And I feel like there's things that this past year that I think that I've kind of ventured out a little bit more, being adventurous in terms of the sound. But there's been times where I thought like, maybe I should start like a second label that's not so much like, you know, that maybe it didn't fit, you know, maybe like, you know, you take a label like Epitaph that did Hellcat, or they did Anti, that, you know, was there are other labels that didn't quite fit on the roster.
They just said, Tim, go crazy, sign a bunch of artists to Hellcat.
Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, and that worked out for them. Yeah, so so I've considered doing things like that, you know. But I mean, at the end of the day, I still wanted, there still has to be some kind of a common thread, and I'm hopeful, I'm thankful that the times that I've kind of ventured out, not the non quote unquote punk, you know, realm, that everything still was well received and people still saw the value in that record. Yeah.
And you kind of mentioned branching off, right? So it segues into my next question. You know, before we go, I want to talk about My Grito, which is a subsidiary essentially of Wiretap. in some ways for the Latin community, right? So what's your mission and your vision for that project?
Yeah, no, in 2020, actually it would have been 2019 actually. I think a lot of us were, and I will mention that I do My Grito with a good friend of mine, Oscar, who I grew up with. So, Oscar was obviously being, really supportive. He's a good friend of mine, and, seeing what I've been doing with Wiretap over the years. And, I think we were all kind of in 2019 coming off of like, George Floyd and, just a time where we were all kind of being more reflective on diversifying just everything that we do, right? I don't want it to make it sound like I think that a lot of people were, sadly, a lot of people at that time were just noticing that they should be a lot more diverse, whether it be in the workplace or their business or whatever. Right. So I think in general, I think that a lot of us were.
It does definitely shine a spotlight, though, for sure.
Sure. And that's a good thing too, right? It's like it's good that people do take note of equality and trying to do things that to be a little bit more diverse. But as someone like myself, who's obviously a person of color, I'm first generation Mexican American, so it's like I identify as Chicano, and I feel like even going to shows as when I was younger, like I always felt like I still wasn't well represented, if you will, right? Like not only on stage but even in the audience too, right? It's like
for sure
I'd go to shows and or even I'll give you an example. Like I remember going to a Vandal show, and of course Joe Escalante is Hispanic himself, but and
that doesn't necessarily mean anything to people listening to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, but I remember going to a show and seeing the opening band and seeing four Mexican kids, four Mexican American kids walk on stage, and it was Audio Karate, So and I remember seeing them on stage and being like, "Hey, those dudes look like me. Those dudes look like my friends or my cousins that I go to school with," right? So I remember like thinking that and being like, all right, cool. This is cool. This is different. It's people that look like me on stage, right? So I think the idea of that stuck with me, not only with over the years of Wiretap, but also in thinking of like when I wanted to start, and me and my partner wanted to start My Grito. It was allowing kids like that didn't really necessarily have the quote unquote, I'll say the luxury, but the luxury of having like PR or having like somebody that can help them and kind of like even take meetings with them and say, hey, like give some of the insight that I had learned with Wiretap and helping them with, in releasing a record or putting together a music video or whatever, right? So that was the overall mentality. It's like, hey, I want to support Latino kids and Latino, artists in general. But not only necessarily that I only wanted to think we were only going to work with Hispanic people. Like it was more about, and it still is, right? It's more about celebrating the culture. I'm proud of that. I'm a Mexican American, and obviously I'm proud of being American, but also of the culture that I come from, right? So it's like we started that not only to help out musicians and put out records, and there's a label side of it, but we also support podcasts as well. So it's part podcast network, it's part record label, but we also do events, and we do a number of other things too. So it's a little bit more of kind of like in terms of broader entertainment base than maybe Wiretap is. But that was the overall the origins and kind of why I think we both decided to kind of launch My Grito.
Yeah. And that's awesome. I mean, my wife is first generation as well. Both her parents came from Mexico, and our son is obviously half Caucasian, half Mexican American. And I think it's, great that like I speak to him in Spanish and he can understand what his mom, like, I don't speak fluently Spanish, but I speak like a fifth grader maybe, or a third grader. I'm not sure, but it takes me a while to say what I want to say, but I can understand a lot more than I can say. And so I think it's just awesome when you can see like, the blending of cultures, but still making it the quintessential rock sound, or, making it sound like, more flavorful, I guess, just more sonically different, but still the same. I mean, if everybody was still listening to just like Led Zeppelin and, the Beatles, like English rock from the 70s, I don't think I would like rock music anymore, because it would be so burnt out and stale. I'd be like, I'm going to move on to something else. And that's probably why a lot of people don't listen to rock music these days, because that's what they think rock music is. But the fact that it has changed and evolved and blended with the different variations, a lot more female rock leads out there these days, a lot more people of color. We talked about Jabril from SHIIVA. There's lots of guys out there and lots of girls out there that are just kicking ass. And I'm like, this would have never happened when I was, growing up in the 80s and 90s. It would have been, I mean, obviously Bad Brains and stuff like that existed, but you just don't see it as often, right? Like it's a lot more prevalent now. And I think that's just a sign of people actually loving music more across cultures. Rock music was never a white person's thing, but it somehow became like pigeonholed as like only white people like that music. And it's like, no, I mean, Chuck Berry and Little Richard and all these guys who started it and innovated it, they're the ones that brought it over. Like, we just happen to be like, it's cool now, just like how hip hop kind of crossed over and everything like that. But, I think it's great when people start to diversify and like I said, blend the sound, because I think that's where the true synergy of rock music is. It's not just one person or one culture's kind of thing. It's everybody. And literally just like a DIY community, the more people work together and support it and sampled and change things, it just makes everything else better. So I think that's awesome. So we'll add some links to, obviously, My Grito and Wiretap and everything else that we got for you. Did you have anything else that you wanted to plug? Any shout outs or anything that you want to say before we leave, so that way people know more about Wiretap or just kind of take some action before we go?
Yeah, no, just the normals, where you can find us all on social at Wiretap Records on Instagram, on Facebook. It's all the same. On Twitter. Is anybody still going to Twitter? I don't know right now. So
not anymore.
Yeah.
Not even Twitter employees are going to Twitter. But.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So if you're still on that platform, you can still find us on there. There probably hasn't been a tweet in about 2 months, but we'll still post stuff every now and there. But yeah, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, still trying to grow that audience as we all are. With TikTok is still the medium that I think everyone's still trying to figure out. But yeah, you can find us on on all the platforms. You can buy our merch, all the records at wiretaprecords.com. As I mentioned, Record Club will go on sale. I'll kind of let you in on the date. It's going on sale on Monday, the 27th, I believe that is. What is that? The Monday after Thanksgiving. So in about a week or so.
8th, I think, because I think my birthday's the next day on the.
Oh, there you go, man. Happy birthday.
Yeah.
I'll give you early birthday.
So maybe I'll just have my wife buy it for my birthday.
Nice. So the 28th, it goes on sale. So that's that. Obviously trying to promote that and let people, find out about that, of course, and see if they're be interested in signing up for 2023. There's actually some fun stuff coming up. We'll be announcing some releases coming up over the next week or two and welcoming some new artists to the label. So if this would be the year that you sign up or if people sign up, it's going to be a good one. So,
very cool. So we'll put all the links to everything below the show and all that stuff. But one last question before we go, and this could be a band on your label or just in general, but what new music would you recommend people check out right now?
Yeah, I'll go with one. Obviously, it's on the label. Everything that I put out, I've gone behind and I enjoy, and I not only because of the people that I work with are good people, but I genuinely enjoy every record, right? But one band I think that I'm dying to get them out to the States because I just love the sound, the band, and just the guys there are just really good dudes. But Lovebreakers out of the UK, I think people just when they see them, they just fall in love with the band in general. Like they got a great sound. It's so melodic. It just the songs are just great songs and a great record. So I think I would love for a lot more people, at least stateside, to find out more about Lovebreakers. Look them up. You can obviously find them on our website, on our social and whatnot, but give them a listen. Their record from last year called Primary Colors is just a phenomenal record. So if you dig UK Britpop, kind of the Clash inspired with a little bit of like more pop leaning type, like the Police stuff, or a little bit more Tom Petty-ish kind of like, but pop music, whatever, like 80s pop with a little bit more attitude, like a Social Distortion type attitude, then you'll definitely dig Lovebreakers.
Nice. And I think they're actually just announced like a bit of a regional tour in the UK with Reminders, who are also on Wiretap.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're doing a little mini Wiretap showcase out in the UK, which I would love to get those. I think they're.
I was just pointing at the Reminders album.
Oh, there it is. Yeah,
nice. It's in the corner.
Very cool.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to check out Lovebreakers, obviously I don't know if they're releasing a new album anytime soon, but you just said that they released an album last year, so definitely check them out. And Rob, I want to thank you so much. I know we both got things to do. It's the middle of the day on a Sunday, so there's obviously football to go watch. But I do want to thank you so much for your time today, guys. Make sure to go check out Wiretap Records. Rob, you're the man. If anybody's sitting here going, "Oh, who is this Rob guy?" Just take my advice and just take this to heart. This guy is a fucking genius when it comes to finding bands. So if you want to check out cool bands, go check out Wiretap Records because Rob knows what the hell he's doing. And guys, remember that the Powered by Rock podcast is powered by our listeners. If you want to show some support, please be sure to subscribe and share the podcast on social media as well. You can also make a donation to the podcast to help us keep making some awesome episodes with awesome guests. You'll find that link as well in the notes below. You can see the full video interview on our YouTube and Spotify as well now. If you want to check out some of our articles, album reviews, lists, and interviews, go to poweredbyrock.com to read our absolutely free rocking blog. You'll also be able to find some merch and gear where you can pick up some items to play and look like a rock legend. That's our show for today. We'll see you soon for the next episode. Until then, rock on.